So the way I'm going to tell this story, my brother is a journalist, and he tells me the way you write a newspaper story is you tell the whole story in the first paragraph, but in not very much detail. And then the next bunch of paragraphs tell it more, and then the next bunch of paragraphs tell it more. And so basically you can read it and get the idea of it, and then you get in more detail later. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about growth control genes a lot. And we're going to start at a really soft focus level and get down to some details as we work along. So that's, you'll hear, it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but the point that I'm actually going to be going into further and further detail. So cancer. And for this part of the course, I want to use a sort of a Bio 111 definition. And in a little bit, I'll talk about the difference between this and the medical definition. In Bio 111, we're going to call this uncontrolled cell division. That is mitosis, or less specifically, just plain old growth. Okay. And that medical terminology is different. Only malignant tumors are called cancer. Okay. And so well, actually, let me just put it up in writing here. Actually, let me just say here. So, as you'll see in a little bit, I'm going to talk about growth control of cells and how it works. And I'm going to make a simplifying definition. I'm going to call cancer cells growing when they shouldn't. Right? And that, in fact, is one of the steps along the way to what the doctors call cancer. That is, typically, they would call these things that we're going to call cancer in Bio 111, precancerous lesions, polyps, that sort of thing. Typically doesn't graduate to being called officially cancer until it becomes malignant. Now I'm going to talk about what that means in a little bit. It turns out the medical definition is more than a little bit fuzzy. And so rather than rest on the medical definition, which is one you'll probably encounter in life, I'm going to use a slightly different definition that allows me to talk about it more sensibly. But you should remember that when you hear that's out in the real world, things are slightly different, a slightly different definition. I will use interchangeably division, mitosis, and growth. I should try to be careful. They all mean basically the same thing, that cells are growing. I don't mean they're necessarily getting larger. They're getting to be more of them. And cell division means not that they're dividing into little ones, but you're getting more cells. The real official thing would be to talk about mitosis. Right? So we're making more cells. So to talk about cancer, I have to talk about what the normal situation is and then see how cancer deviates from that. So normally, most cells divide rarely, if at all. Right? So one surprising thing is, after all this fuss we spent talking about mitosis, it turns out that mitosis only happens relatively rarely in your body. Right? There's certain cells that divide often, but if you're an adult, you're more or less full size. And so you're not doing you're not growing. My kids are doing a lot more mitosis than I am because they're growing. You're replacing cells that have died or wear out. You're replacing skin cells and stomach lining cells, blood cells. But most of the cells in your body reproduce only rarely. They last quite a long time. And so they don't divide most of the time. And because of that, this all has to be very carefully controlled. This is controlled by things that are called growth factors. And growth factors are produced by other cells and stimulate target cells to divide when needed for things like healing, growth, replacement, etc. Right? And let me give you an example of what I mean by growth factors. There are